Bienvenue à la réunion.
Welcome to meeting number 137 of the Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage.
Of course, it's taking place in a hybrid format, truly a hybrid format. It's interesting just to even see Monsieur Shampoo sitting there. I don't usually see him in a hybrid format. Anyway, so just to remind you all about the rules, please do not speak until the chair recognizes you. Please make sure you don't take photographs of what's going on the screen. You can get it later on in the public website. And also remember just to put your hand up by using the little hand sign up on your computer. And I want to remind you that I think that's it. I think I've reminded you of everything I should remind you of. Now, everyone's gotten their connections done properly, and so we're going to begin the meeting. So, pursuant to the order of reference of Tuesday, October the 29th, 2024, the committee will commence its further consideration of the 8th report of the Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage. So today we're meeting with the Minister of Canadian Heritage as required by the motion from the House of Commons, and the Honourable Pascal Saint-Onge is here. This meeting will be 1 hour, and the Minister is accompanied by Isabelle Mondoux, Deputy Minister of Heritage, Joël Montminy, Senior Deputy Assistant Minister of Heritage. Now, Minister, welcome. Thank you for taking the time to come, knowing what's going on in your life at this moment. So we appreciate your coming, and you have 5 minutes for your opening remarks. Thank you.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair, dear members of the committee. We are all here this morning to talk about CBC Radio-Canada. I wanted to be clear for everybody in this room and for everybody listening to us. Conservatives are instrumentalizing anything related to CBC Radio-Canada to try to undermine the public broadcasters' credibility. In reality, they don't want any good for this institution and are trying their best to do everything they can to destroy it. So these are completely different visions that are being opposed today. First, the Conservatives are saying that they are concerned about people losing their jobs. This is false. The history of the decisions they made as the Harper-Poilievre government show that the picture is completely different. There were tens of thousands of jobs that were cut and that were also lost, indirect jobs also. Let's remember what happened. After 2012, they cut $150 million of funding to CBC Radio-Canada each year. Because of all these cuts by the Harper-Poilievre government, over 1,700 Canadians lost their jobs. So I find it very hypocritical and false to hear what they are saying. Now, regarding their sudden interest for what's happening, and rather, in terms of what our government has done, we will make sure that we take a close look at what has happened and what the reports are so that we can explore better ways to do things. But again, what we're hearing from the Conservatives is really just lies. It's under the Conservative government that attacks were included, and also there were many problems reported, and that was also indicated by the chair, by Hubert Lacroix at the time. The reality is that the Conservatives are constantly campaigning to destroy CBC Radio-Canada. We cannot let them have their way. The reality is that they no longer want public broadcasters, independent public broadcasters, play a major role to inform our communities throughout the country. They do not want CBC Radio-Canada to be a vehicle for cultural and artistic stories. So they are trying to destroy over 100 years of history, a brand that is recognizable throughout the country in both official languages.
They are showing a total disregard for reconciliation and telling us that they no longer want CBC Radio-Canada to keep producing content in 8 Indigenous languages. Avec leur slogan définancer.
With their slogan, Defund CBC Radio-Canada, they're telling us that they no longer want a public broadcaster there for Francophone communities throughout the country. Let's be quite clear on this. Whatever their empty slogans say, it's impossible to defund CBC without having a devastating impact on all of Canada. Saying the opposite is showing the complete improvisation and lack of vision of the Conservatives in terms of public broadcasting. In fact, the story they're telling regarding CBC Radio-Canada is false and disconnected from reality. Let's continue with the facts. Surveys show that for many years now that despite all the criticisms and wish to do better, most Canadians largely support CBC Radio-Canada. Just 3 weeks ago, we had the latest survey, and we saw that 78% of Canadians support CBC Radio-Canada. Conservatives need to notice and take notice.
Conservatives. Could it be that they want to undermine the credibility of the CBC Radio-Canada because they prefer a digital universe flooded with more or less credible, self-proclaimed influencers, disinformation, and even foreign interference orchestrated by states hostile to Canada? Rappelons qu'en matière de journalisme.
Let's remember that in terms of journalism, Radio-Canada and CBC employ more than one-third of the journalists in the country. By defunding the institution, which is what they're working for, that would mean that Canadians would be deprived of professional journalistic information. For example, shows such as Enquête and The Fifth Estate, which have been around for 50 years, they shed light on the issues that concern us, do they not? Attacking the public broadcaster is above all a way of weakening us collectively. This Conservative relentlessness is dangerous. They claim to be pro-freedom while constantly working to deprive Canadians of their public broadcaster. Is that what they're trying to do? Let foreign platforms come in?
Comme je l'ai dit plus tôt, il y a deux vues opposées. Une vision conservatrice. Il vous reste 30 secondes, Madame la Ministre. Merci. Une vision conservatrice qui remet le Canada en arrière de 100 ans et qui ferait du Canada un pays du G7 sans diffuseur public. Et notre vision, une vision où nous voulons investir dans notre pays et lui donner les outils
and proud of Canada's stories. Aux collègues du NPD et du Bloc, travaillons ensemble pour améliorer.
To my colleagues in the NDP and the Bloc, let's work together to improve the situation without playing the Conservatives' dangerous game. They're not interested in working together. All they want to do is shut down CBC Radio-Canada. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Minister. And now I'm going to go to the question and answer period. And we will begin. Remember, please, I'm trying to keep you on time here, guys. So I'll give you the 30-second heads up when you're finishing up your time. The first, all the questions include, the time limits include questions and answers, not just questions. Thank you. So we begin with the Conservatives for Mr. Gourd for 6 minutes. Mr. Kurek for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you, Minister, for being here. And just to let you know, I will be splitting my time with Mr. Gourd. I'll let him know when that time comes. Minister, when the CEO of CBC, Ms. Tate, and the board appeared before this committee, the board made it clear that they approved of her performance as the CEO of the public broadcaster. But it was also made clear that it is your call whether or not she gets a bonus. My question, when the board made clear that they approve of her performance, do you and will you be planning on awarding Ms. Tate a bonus?
Pour l'instant, je peux dire que la décision n'a pas été prise.
For now, I can tell you that the decision has not been made yet. I'd remind you also that the Privacy Act means that we can't disclose the details of people's pays and contracts. So the decision has not been taken, and we'll continue to look at the issue in light of Ms. Tate's performance.
Thank you very much, Minister. But it has been made clear that both Ms. Tate and the government can be clear there are not privacy laws that prohibit disclosure of this important information that certainly many taxpayers are wanting to know. Minister, will you commit to this committee today to ensure that Ms. Tate does not receive a bonus for this year, and also ensure that she does not receive a generous taxpayer-funded exit package, such as a severance, when she completes her term as CEO of the CBC come January 4th?
Je vous rappelle qu'il n'y a pas.
I'd remind you that she doesn't have bonuses to start. That's just not how it works. So it's false to say that that possibility exists. And on the other hand, like I just said, the decision has not been made in terms of Ms. Tate's employment. Now, what we can say, what we should remember is that one of the first Harper government did when it took power in 2006 was to significantly increase bonuses by 65% for CEOs and other leaders. So one of the groups that was done for, the Harper government was saying, the interpreter knows that multiple people are taking at the same time.
Thank you, Minister. Do you know who the highest paid CEO in the history of CBC, the public broadcaster, is? The highest paid CEO in CBC's history. Do you know who that is?
Écoutez, ce que je sais, c'est que
Listen, what I know is that the Conservative government increased bonuses of Huberté Lacroix.
Ms. Catherine Tate, and certainly the board seems to approve of her performance. It appears that you're unwilling to rule out giving her a generous bonus and a generous exit package. Certainly, I think the Canadians demand more respect for their tax dollars. Madam Chair, I would hand the rest of my time over to Monsieur Gord.
You have a little under 3 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the Minister to be here. Just a little reminder of what happened under Jean Chrétien, CBC Radio-Canada. The funding had been cut by over $400 million on $950 million. So that's nearly 45% that was been cut. Just so we remember that when things are tough, everybody's got to do their part. It was 10% under the Conservative government instead of 45%. Now, you added money, Minister, to the budget for CBC Radio-Canada, I think $45 million. Is that correct?
si ma mémoire est bonne.
If my memory
serves, it's 42 million that was in the last budget.
Thank you, Minister. How many employees lost their jobs in the mandatory reworking of all of that since there was a deficit? I think there was a little bit of attrition. I don't have the exact numbers, but I can tell you that there were no massive cuts in the way we saw under Harper, where over 1,700 people lost their jobs, which had an impact on services across the country. Thank you, Minister. Please send us the exact number of jobs that were cut. Now, in the budget of $18 million, do you think how many jobs could have been saved if that money had been reassigned to employees instead of being sent to bonuses? As you know, it's CBC Radio-Canada that makes those decisions internally, and the government has no regard and rather no control over what happens. You've already asked that question in the past and gotten the answer. Minister, if you could choose only one, CBC Radio-Canada or the interests of Canadians, what would it be? I have asked for that the funding model and the pay model be reviewed, and we expect it to be responsible. Thank you, Minister. Now, the model that will be presented, would that be because it will be presented because of the Conservative Party's pressure? I have no idea what you are referring to when you're talking about the model. I'm talking about the bonuses. You said you wanted to review the payment method.
Monsieur Gould, your time is up. Thank you. To the Liberals, Mr. Souza, Charles Souza, 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister, for being here and your opening remarks. Minister, can you talk about the role that the CBC Radio-Canada plays in promoting and strengthening Canadian culture and the audiovisual sector, and share with us why it's important that it continues to receive support rather than having it gutted like the Conservatives threatened to do?
Merci beaucoup pour votre question. Puis, il faut
Thank you very much for your question. We have to remind all Canadians that my Conservative colleagues that a public broadcaster is a dedicated source, a dedicated information source that is sustainable, independent, reliable throughout the country from ocean to ocean to ocean. And that is the only information medium that has the ability to deliver on those, and that has that mandate. It's the only public broadcaster that provides information both in French and English and in 8 Indigenous languages. CBC Radio-Canada is also a medium that invests in creators, homegrown creators here, as we saw during the emergency situations. CBC Radio-Canada is always there to make sure our point of view is brought up and to give our perspective. And that's why most Canadians believe that CBC Radio-Canada is very important for them. 74% of Canadians say that it's a reliable source of information. 78% says that CBC Radio-Canada reflects the opinion diversity on various topics. Most Canadians believe that in English, the English services on CBC help them understand what happens elsewhere in the country. That's 73% rather, and 70% of Canadians say that it's a reliable source of information. Now, for francophones, Radio-Canada has the highest ratings, and most French speakers believe that Radio-Canada's services is a reliable source of information. 85% of the Canadian population saying that, and that the news is impartial and independent, 72%. So you can see how important CBC Radio-Canada is to Canadians, and it's very strange to see the Conservatives trying to destroy such a wonderful institution.
Thank you for that, Minister. And further note, the Conservatives have said that they want to dismantle the CBC while leaving Radio-Canada largely intact. Would that even work? Is that possible?
il faut être très clair à ce sujet-là.
We have to be very clear on that topic, and that no matter what their empty slogans are saying, it's impossible to defund CBC without having a devastating impact on Radio-Canada and CBC for a number of reasons. First of all, we know, and the board of Radio-Canada has already explained it, and CBC rather, that in many regional offices, the technical teams are integrated. First thing. Second thing, now when we're talking about cutting public funding, that's 2/3 of public funding that they want to cut, and to eliminate thousands of jobs. That's impossible. It's impossible that private revenue would not be impacted. It's a lot more than what the numbers seem to show at first glance. So I don't know in what world CBC Radio-Canada would be, and Radio-Canada would be able to continue with its mission within Quebec and elsewhere.
Yeah, the Conservative MPs have also expressed concerns over job reductions at CBC Radio-Canada, yet they've simultaneously proposed defunding the organization. It seems contradictory to oppose job cuts while proposing a plan that would cause thousands to lose their jobs. So, Minister, how would the Conservatives' plan, in your mind, to defund the CBC impact those jobs, everyday Canadians, and who would be most affected?
Écoutez, l'impact de fermer CBC Radio-Canada et de définancer CBC.
Well, the impact of closing the offices and of defunding Radio-Canada would be devastating. That's thousands of jobs that are being threatened. Right now, we're looking at about 8,000 jobs that would be lost with the funding being suppressed for CBC Radio-Canada. So hearing the Conservatives say what they're saying about the number of jobs is just not credible. Now, people in the North also would lose, for many of them, the only medium that creates content in their own Indigenous language. We need to remember also that the investments of Radio-Canada in production of information has a very important impact on our economy and the entire cultural system in Canada. According to certain estimates, each dollar invested in Radio-Canada generates $2 in economic activity. That's support that's essential for artists, creators, and those who contribute up to $58 billion to our economy. The cultural sector and audiovisual sectors also, and that's 673,000 jobs in Canada. So directly and indirectly, cutting funding would have a devastating impact on our economy and on the entire audiovisual sectors, in addition to depriving Canadians of our public broadcaster that has existed for nearly 100 years. I don't understand that attack against a brand that is so important to our country.
Mr. Souza, if you wish to do anything with it. Thank you. Okay. I now go to the Bloc Québécois. Martin Champoux. Martin, you have 6 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Merci.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Madam Chair, for making time in your schedules, which I'm sure is quite busy right now. So thank you for being there. It's very important, especially to talk about this topic that is very important. As you mentioned in your opening remarks, Quebecers and Canadians throughout the country, I think nearly 80%, when asked, want to have a public broadcaster that provides high-quality information and that is doing well. Of course, there are problems, and there are, of course, criticisms that we could level at the broadcaster and at the management over the past few years. But I think we also need, and I agree with you on this, to find solutions. First of all, go on survival mode for the public broadcaster in terms of its future. Now, you talked about the impact of the Conservatives' threats on the public funding to CBC Radio-Canada and on the French language services at Radio-Canada. Now, let's go back to this. At what point would you see the impacts severely impacting Francophone culture in Canada if the budget was severely cut?
Okay, I want to thank my colleague for his question because it's a very relevant question. And we both know that Radio-Canada is like a lighthouse. It's a very important institution for Quebec, for Francophone communities outside of Quebec, as well as for the survival of French language in a North American universe, which is quasi-only unilingual. So when you're talking about cutting 2/3 of public funding, because this is the portion that goes to CBC, of course, it leaves very little money for the mission, the mandate of Radio-Canada. But on top of this, we are risking having so many jobs disappear that, in fact, the capacity for technical production is going to be compromised as well on the side of Francophone activity of our public broadcaster. So for me, it is obvious, and I cannot understand how the Conservatives are making such a proposal while pretending that Canadians are going to accept a public broadcaster, but only in French, and then to deprive the rest of Canada of a public broadcaster, which is there for, but also through the public. So I think this is absolutely illogical and impossible. Thank you very much, especially since, doing this kind of cutting in the technical services, to talk only about the French broadcaster, they would obviously completely like an impact on the rest of broadcasting in Quebec because Radio-Canada plays an important role. So there would be an impact on the entire ecosystem and, even health. There must be the presence of Radio-Canada as a producer, as a generator of French content. I want to talk about the cost. We talked with Ms. Tate last time she came to this committee. So the cost that the Conservatives say, are excessive. And yes, I am absolutely, questioning what they want to do. But okay, this is another topic. The fact is, in the conservative discourse, we're saying that it costs a fortune to have a quality broadcaster, public broadcaster. Of course, there are particular challenges in Canada, with Quebec, and also with the fact that there is the size of the country. But it's $33 per Canadian to have both Radio-Canada and CBC. So do you know what it costs in other countries? And Madam Minister, do you know what Quebecers and Canadians would be ready to pay to have a public broadcaster? Without having, for example, subscription fees, without having so much advertising in all the platforms, do you think that Canadians would be ready to pay a little bit more than the $33 that they're paying so that we could have employees that could be paid adequately instead of talking about bonuses so that we can attract people with, salaries that would be competitive. So what do you think of this option of simply increasing the burden? I'm not talking about the burden really, but just an annual cost per Canadian. Honestly, internationally, it's a pity our image that we have, at least among democratic countries. Among the G7, we are at $33 per year per inhabitant, but the average in other countries is $86 per year per inhabitant. So you can see we're way below. So there's countries that had propaganda, for example, Germany during the Second World War. This year, they're investing hundreds of dollars per inhabitant because they understand very well the importance of having a source of information that is public, but it is independent from the government. So I think that, yes, there is absolutely manners of examining the way CBC Radio-Canada is funded. So I want to remind you, right now, it's $33 per inhabitant, but under Harper, it had gone down to $29 per inhabitant per year. So, we're the lowest funding amongst all the sevens, which is the U.S. I mean, they are at $4 a year, and we know what they think about public broadcasters, generally speaking. So I think that there is definitely a lot more room to have a better funding for Radio-Canada, something that will allow us more previsibility and stability. That would be important for the job, but also for the presence, in Quebec and also in Canada and the rest of Indigenous population. Thank you. Thank you. I'm sorry, your time is up.
Can I ask everyone to please mute your mics when you're not speaking? We're getting some feedback, the interpreters tell us. Thank you very much. And so I'm going to go now for 6 minutes to the New Democrats. Nikki Ashton, 6 minutes, Nikki.
Minister, I recently proposed a motion blocked by Liberal and Bloc Québécois colleagues to deal with some pretty serious issues at Soccer Canada. Now news has broken that this is only the tip of the iceberg. Let's be clear what we're talking about. A culture of pervasive cheating and pressuring at the top of our national soccer sporting organization and our national teams. Players have been quoted as saying the following, quote, "No wasn't an option. John Herdman put his staff under a lot of pressure. If his assistants refused, they were put aside," end quote. Or, quote, "You could be blacklisted, which could change your entire career," end quote. You are the former sports minister and the current heritage minister. Were you aware of this pervasive culture at Soccer Canada? And more importantly, what did you do, if anything, recognizing that the federal government funds Soccer Canada?
Je vous remercie pour votre question.
Alors, merci pour votre question. Et thank you very much. I invite you to ask this question to the Minister of Sports because it is no longer under my portfolio. And I just want to remind you that I am here because there was a motion in chamber because apparently we need to talk about CBC Radio-Canada this week. I am here taking time from my parental leave to talk about CBC Radio-Canada. This is why I am here today.
Appreciate that, Madam Minister.
May I remind members that we need to keep to the orders of the day. This meeting is special for CBC discussions. Thank you.
Yes, well, we also have a minister who was the former Minister of Sport, and the CBC has covered extensively in the last few days the scandal at Soccer Canada. I would like to pass on to the Minister of Heritage, perhaps to work with her colleague, the Minister of Sport, who we've heard nothing from on this scandal. If they can table how much money from Own the Podium went to funding spying-related activities like the purchasing of drones, how much money was spent on surveillance, travel for coaches or equipment used for spying.
Point of order.
Excuse me, Mr. There's a point of order, and I cannot tell because there's a light shining right on the screen, and I cannot see a few of you. So is it Mr. Souza with his hand up?
Yes.
Yes, go ahead. Go ahead, Mr. Souza.
I want to issue a point of order because, as you know, the minister is here on a Consent Week. There's a number of issues that are at play, and let's stick to the orders of the day in regards to the purpose of this meeting.
Thank you. Ms. Ashton, please be reminded about the orders of the day.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm in my speaking time. I am relating to something that the CBC has covered, and I believe Canadians deserve accountability. I'm actually quite concerned to see the extent to which Liberals do not want to talk about the scandal unfolding at Soccer Canada, reminding ourselves that Soccer Canada is federally funded. Very disappointed to hear the lack of transparency from the Liberals on this. Let's move on, and I certainly hope to receive documentation regarding Own the Podium spending when it comes to Soccer Canada's spying-related activities. Let's move on to the CBC. Catherine Tate is wrapping up her time at the CBC, and between her leadership and the Liberals' running of the CBC, we've seen some serious damage to the CBC's reputation. Let's look at the record, which I'm proud to say was recently recognized by the House, that the threat of Liberal cuts to led to one of the largest reductions of jobs in CBC's history. Because of the Liberals, the CBC is now looking at a smaller workforce than even during the Stephen Harper years. And that's before the Conservative leader made his own cuts. There are numerous communities, including my own, my region here in northern Manitoba, that still does not have a CBC presence that it is mandated to have according to the CRTC. Meanwhile, we know CBC is spending an exorbitant amount of money on executive bonuses. All this has contributed to a movement that we've seen from the Conservatives to destroy the CBC. The Canadians need the CBC. They need Radio-Canada. They need a strong public broadcaster, but not one that doles out executive bonuses while cutting jobs, not one that leaves entire swaths of the country without a CBC presence, as they are mandated to do. So how will you work with the new CEO to change the mandate of the CBC to ensure commitment to local journalism is prioritized over executive bonuses?
Premièrement, je tiens à rectifier les faits parce que ce que ma collègue avance, c'est totalement faux.
Well, first, I want to remind us all of the facts because what I just heard is completely false. There were nearly 2,000 jobs lost under the Conservative government. We restored all of the funding that was cut, and we ensured that there would be money to avoid further cuts to CBC Radio-Canada. So I want to remind us all of these facts. Now, for the future, my objective, clearly, is to ensure that CBC Radio-Canada has the capacity and the means to provide information in all regions across Canada, including in Manitoba, including in Indigenous communities, including in Francophone communities outside Quebec. Why? Because that's essential, that's critical, and I'm very much looking forward to working with my colleagues from the NDP and the Bloc on the future of CBC Radio-Canada, and I think on that we all share the same interests, and that is to ensure that we have a strong, reliable, stable, and independent public broadcaster.
Thank you very much. Ms. Ashton, you have 20 seconds left.
Well, I will start off by saying we've been raising the lack of a permanent CBC presence here in our region for years, and we've seen no effort from the Liberals to address this. Very concerning, and once again, I think an example of more public relations from the Liberals and actually making our public broadcaster live up to its mandate, which is a commitment to local and regional journalism on the ground, not in theory.
Thank you, Ms. Ashton.
Real leadership from
Thank
the
you.
CEO.
I now go to the second round. This is a 5-minute round, and I begin with Mr. Waugh for the Conservatives. Kevin, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks to the Minister for coming today. Minister, you and your department gave an extra $42 million to the CBC earlier this year, and it was, quote, to save journalism. Well, we found out that half of the 42 million went to bonuses. How does bonuses, in your opinion, save journalism? Of the 42 million that you handed over extra to the CBC, while 18 million went to the bonuses. How did it save journalism in this country?
C'est totalement faux.
Well, that's completely false. The government reinvested money after the cuts of $115 million made by the Harper Poilievre government to ensure that we would be able to maintain our ability to have high-quality journalism throughout the country. And now we all know, for the recent cuts, that there is a media crisis throughout the country. It's more and more the web giants that have money, even on the private sector for the private media outlets. Now, to ensure the quality,
Minister, you gave an extra 42 million, and it was supposed to help journalism. Instead, it helped with the bonuses. 3.3 million to the executives. The other was spread around. So as a former union rep, a very successful union rep, I might add, what would you have told your members in this situation? They're cutting massively in jobs on the ground, and yet the bonuses went all to executives. So you, as a former union rep, what would you say to this?
Premièrement, je réfute l'affirmation.
First of all, I'm going to refute my colleague's statement that there's massive cuts at CBC Radio-Canada, because that's false. Jobs have been maintained at CBC Radio-Canada. There has been some attrition of some positions, that's all. And all of that is because our government supports CBC Radio-Canada. And if it was for the Conservatives, well, those 8,000 jobs under those cuts would be threatened. So in terms of jobs, as a former union worker, I very much remember what the Conservatives did in terms of job losses at CBC Radio-Canada.
Does this sit well with you as the minister that the rank and file in this case paid the price, and the bonuses were giving that your department gave, the extra 42 million, 18 million of that went to the executives? Does that sit well with you today? Trying to save journalism, as you said?
Je suis très fière aujourd'hui en tant que syndicaliste.
I'm very proud as a Minister of Canadian Heritage and former union worker to be fighting so hard each day to prevent the Conservatives from destroying our incredible institution that is nearly 100 years old, that provides so many services to Canadians. Without CBC Radio-Canada, there might no longer be any French outside of Canada, and I will fight against what the Conservatives are trying to do to our public broadcaster.
Minister, very quickly, Tate's tenure at CBC since 2018, is it a success or a failure, knowing today that the viewership is in decline, the ad revenue has plummeted, and the trust in this country on the public broadcaster has declined? So, Tate, your opinion as minister, has it been a success or a failure since 2018? Very quickly.
Tout ce que les conservateurs font, c'est attaquer.
All the Conservatives do is attack individuals to try to get license to destroy an institution. We can disagree on, or you can disagree on some decisions, but the reality is that over half of Canadians each month visit Radio-Canada and CBC and cite it as being a reliable, credible source of information. Not only that, but
I'm going to share my time with Mr. Currick. Go ahead, Damien.
So allow me, excuse me, Mr. Currick, you are going to only have about 50 seconds. Actually, less than that. So just to let you know. Go ahead.
Just to be clear, Minister, you refused to rule out earlier a big taxpayer bonus to the scandal-plagued jet-setting and recently revealed conflict of interest CEO of CBC, a CEO that makes more than the Prime Minister and more than double your salary as a minister. $18 million went in fat bonuses at a time when Canadians are visiting food banks in record numbers. For the sake of taxpayers and all Canadians that are struggling, let's agree that while we may disagree on the future of CBC, we can agree today to defund bonuses at the public broadcaster. Minister, will you today commit to reject any request for bonuses that ends up on your desk and commit to issuing a cabinet directive of that nature?
Je veux juste rappeler à mon collègue conservateur la
I just want to remind my Conservative colleague of the Harper Poilievre government's attitude at the time. And now what we heard from the former policy advisor that explained in 2009 in the Policy Options magazine what happened if you were like Hubert Lacroix and a high executive. Well, the more you make cuts, the higher your bonuses. And that really shows what the priorities were. And it recommended that the next government do the same things. She wrote that the Harper government tied ministers' bonuses to how many cuts were made and so on. So I don't want to hear about bonuses being so problematic. And I want to remind people that the Conservatives want to completely defund CBC Radio-Canada. That would lead to the closure.
We've gone over time on that one, guys. So I'm going to go to the Liberals now. Wayne Long. Wayne, for 5 minutes, please. 5 minutes, guys. We're going to run out of time.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon to my colleagues and Minister. Thank you so much for taking time today. I did want to pick up on MP Waugh's comments first, just talking about, and you hear it from the Conservative playbook all the time, that viewership is down. So what does that really mean? And how is viewership measured, Minister? Do these viewership measurements actually take into account how Canadians are consuming media in 2024? And by my read, it's largely through streaming. And just before you answer, I just want to quickly comment too on just my riding of St. John Rosse. People in this riding love the CBC. They love CBC Radio. They love CBC New Brunswick. They love the Canadian content. They love the fact that CBC ties our community together. In fact, you know, if the Conservatives want some free advice from me in Southern New Brunswick here, I think it's a wrong play to constantly talk about defunding and dismantling the CBC. I think it's a major mistake, and I think Canadians will rally as they did in 2015, 19, and 21. Anyway, Minister, back to you. I just want to talk about, get your comments on Conservatives saying viewership is down. Thank you.
Je pense que les conservateurs sont pris dans les années 80.
Well, I think the Conservatives are stuck in the 80s. At the time, internet didn't even exist. So we'll have to remember the facts again, go back to the facts. You heard me say clearly that for CBC Radio-Canada, 21 million Canadians use those sites and those services. That's over half the Canadian population that use Radio-Canada CBC services each month. Each month, over half of the Canadian population uses, an adult population uses all the services, the online services and so on also. There are 10 million downloads of podcasts per month. There are millions of others on other applications and platforms, including streaming services. CBC is also providing the first online service in terms of website traffic and so on. Now, in Toronto, in Calgary, Edmonton, and elsewhere, there are so many offices and broadcasts, and many of those podcasts received awards and were first in their category in 2023. Now, when we look at the facts and everything that's happening, we really wonder why the Conservatives are trying to cut such a precious tool for Canadians and Quebecers.
Yeah, I wonder why too, Minister. I would agree with you. Minister, we know that public service media organizations have different responsibilities from private media because they have a mandate to serve all communities from coast to coast to coast. What potential effects would defunding CBC Radio-Canada have on Indigenous communities and their access to Indigenous language stories, news, and information? Thank you, Minister.
Ben, merci. Puis encore une fois, quand...
Thank you. And once again, when the Conservatives talk about defunding the CBC, they forget that CBC Radio-Canada are one of the only public providers that provide information and content in the 8 Indigenous languages. I talked about various people. I talked with others from these communities earlier, and they don't understand why the Conservatives want to abandon them, because for the Inuit, CBC is one of the only platforms that or only broadcasters that provide content in their language. Now, to retain the language, the culture, Inuit, Indigenous, First Nations, or Métis, I mean, there's a huge role for CBC Radio-Canada to play. So it's very unfortunate to see the Conservatives not take this reality into consideration when they talk about defunding Radio-Canada and all the efforts that we are making for reconciliation, for partnerships, and to provide support to Indigenous communities.
50 seconds.
Thank you, Minister. I just want to follow up too on just, you obviously just talked about impacts to Indigenous communities. Also, though, how might cuts to CBC Radio Canada funding that obviously the Conservatives want to dismantle and defund CBC, but how are those cuts going to affect other underserved populations such as rural, minority language, newcomer communities? Thank you.
La plupart des Canadiens qui vivent en région rurale.
Most Canadians living in rural regions, you talked about your riding, for example, well, 72% of them state that the news and information services provided by CBC Radio-Canada help them understand what's happening not only at home, but elsewhere across the country. Now, in terms of Canadians living in rural areas, many are not well served by other media. Now, and that's for cities of over 50,000 people. Many people many local media can only cover local media. So we really see the role that CBC Radio-Canada has to play across the country in terms of filling the gaps. We have to remember that over 1 million Francophones outside Quebec are being served by the Francophone services provided by Radio-Canada, and that allows them access to the language, the culture, the community. Now, Radio-Canada and CBC International also provides online news in 7 different languages.
Oui, donc l'anglais, le français,
Yes, French, English, Spanish, Tagalog, Indian, Punjabi, and other languages, and those are all communities well established here in Canada.
Thank you, Minister.
To the block, Martin Shampoo. Martin, you have 2.5 minutes. Everybody seems to be going a minute over their time, so I will forgive you if you just move a little bit over your time.
Je vais profiter de votre indulgence. Merci, Madame.
I will benefit from that indulgence. Thank you, Madam Chair. Minister, I have questions still on the real motivations of the Conservatives in terms of criticizing the salaries of the executives at CBC Radio-Canada, because usually people in the private market understand how markets work generally. And not that I think Ms. Tate deserves such a high salary, but that's not what we're talking. That's not what I want to talk about here. But just to compare things with Australia, I'm going to compare it with Australia because the numbers are available. 27 million in terms populations. ABC, the Australian public broadcaster, earns $820 million per year. So, I mean, just to compare apples to oranges, 820,000 rather per year, just to compare apples with apples. Now, in terms of trying to erode the credibility of mainstream media, as we say, well, that's something we're seeing across the world by certain types of politicians. We don't need to go very far to find an example. For years, Trump has been talking in the United States, has been talking about fake news, which means that there's a huge gap between what people think of as left-wing and right-wing media, and that gap has been growing in terms of information also. So now what I think some people who believe in populism and disinformation in terms of politics are trying to do is erode the credibility of journalists who are doing their jobs properly, who will find corruption, who will go out and ferret out what kinds of problems are happening. Now, what we see is that Pierre Poilievre is trying to get closer to that way of thinking when the majority of Canadians don't feel that way. What do you think of that? Well, thank you very much for that question. Just as you do, I find this very dangerous because we live in a democratic country and democratic society. We need to have people in power, whether it's big businesses, governments, or those who have the most influence in the country, be accountable to Canadians, to the population. That's what it makes the difference between a democracy and an authoritarian regime, where there just isn't any of that. Now, when I hear Conservatives trying to attack our system, our news system, and so on, I think it's an attack on our democracy, and that's very dangerous. And that tells us a lot about how they see democracy working. Another thing I find dangerous is that it's dangerous to our national security. We know that online there is a lot of disinformation and even foreign interference. So if we want our country to be resilient when faced with those who are trying to destabilize our democracy, we need information sources for Canadians by Canadians. So when we see attacks on our most solid public broadcaster with attacks on our journalists.
Thank you. Now, Nikki Ashton. Nikki, you have 2.5 minutes, and I will be lenient. Go ahead.
Thank you. I would like to use my time to move a motion you've all received notice for regarding Canada's ongoing protection of Nazis who were allowed to enter Canada during and in the immediate aftermath of the Holocaust. This is a shameful part of our history, and I would urge all my colleagues to support this motion. We just marked Remembrance Day. All of us, I'm sure, attended ceremonies honoring the Canadian soldiers who have served our country. We vowed never to forget the sacrifices of the many Canadians who served and died throughout history. This year also marked the 80th anniversary of D-Day, the historic Battle of Normandy, where Canadians played a pivotal role in liberating Europe and the world from fascism. But the Battle of Normandy came at a heavy cost. 19,000 Canadians were killed or wounded by the Nazis. In France, they remember. It was very emotional for me and my family when this summer on a private visit, I heard the playing of O Canada and heard the appreciation from a town liberated by Canadian soldiers. 80 years later, they remember. They remember what the fight against Nazism and fascism was all about. This is personal for many of us. Today, I can't stop thinking of many members of my family who fought the Nazis. They knew what was at stake, the very future of humanity itself. I think of my family and my community. I think of my family in Greece who suffered under Nazi occupation and fascist brutality. I think of the Jewish communities across Greece and in the village next to my papus, my grandfathers, that were wiped out by the Holocaust, an absolute result of Nazi ideology. And I think of others who have family members who were victims of the Nazis, or have family who never got that opportunity to come to Canada because they were turned away by a country that was far too comfortable saying no to Jews, the victims of the Holocaust, but yes to too many perpetrators. Canadians deserve to know how, according to the Deschênes Commission, Nazis were welcomed into this country. Many Jewish, Polish, and Ukrainian organizations have been clear the names have been released, need to be released. And yet Library and Archives Canada, which is under the Minister of Heritage, said no. This is shameful. So I want to move my motion that given that the Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage regrets the continued protection given by the Minister of Canadian Heritage to the estimated 900 Nazis that were allowed to enter Canada after the Second World War, etc., be supported in this meeting today.
I just wanted to inform the committee that Ms. Ashton gave notice of this motion in writing in English and French on Monday, September the 23rd. So it can be tabled on the floor today. And so I have to ask if anyone wants to discuss or debate this motion. Seeing no hands up, I think we're going to have to call the question on the motion since there's no debate.
Madame la Présidente, je pense qu'il y a des mains levées.
Madam Chair, I think there's two hands.
Excuse me, I'm just going to call the hands that are up. Mr. Souza.
Yes, I want clarity. I mean, we're just new to the committee, and I just want to have time to reflect on what's being proposed to determine if we should adjourn or not the debate.
Ms. Ashton.
Yes, I can certainly elaborate. The motion that I submitted on Monday, September 23rd, indicates that given that the Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage regrets the continued protection given by the Minister of Canadian Heritage to the estimated 900 Nazis that were allowed to enter Canada after the Second World War by refusing to release their names and refusing to listen to organizations representing victims of the Nazis, the committee invite the Minister of Canadian Heritage to instruct Libraries and Archives Canada to release the names of the 900 Nazis before International Holocaust Remembrance Day on Monday, January 27th, 2025, and that this motion be reported to the House.
Mr. Shampoo, Monsieur Shampoo, matin.
Madame la Présidente, encore une fois,
Madam Chair, once again, Ms. Ashton has a surprise here for us at the end of the committee. There was a long discussion here that we could have, and I'd be happy to discuss it. I have very serious concerns regarding this motion. First, because there was a report and an investigation done. And even then, the motion mentions about 900 or so when we've heard 800 elsewhere. The numbers are different. Now, were these people Nazis? Not necessarily. The investigation showed that the majority of these people were not suspected of anything and were cleared right away. And some of the other issues I'd like to raise is that these were people who were investigated, and I think there were very few, maybe a dozen, that were investigated after the Duchesne Commission, and it was thought that there was no need to go further. So this is to try to release the names of 800 to 900 people, the vast majority of whom are people who very likely are deceased and whose descendants are well integrated into Canadian society, and nothing that would be reprehensible in terms of their parents or grandparents. I think this is extremely delicate as a situation, and Ms. Ashton brings this motion at the end of the committee when we really should have had more time to debate it. So I'm very, once again, uncomfortable with this kind of situation. For this kind of motion when we're talking about CBC Radio-Canada. Point of order, Madam Chair.
Sorry, who's saying point of order?
Ms. Ashton.
Ms. Ashton, you're calling on a
Thank
point
you,
of
Madam
order?
Chair. I know this committee has made issue of trying to assume where members would be coming from. I used my time to put forward a motion that I submitted almost 2 months ago and on the week of Remembrance Day. So, if people want to debate the truthfulness of the Duchesne Commission, which I find deeply problematic, but to impugn my motives on the week of Remembrance Day on a motion that I submitted on something as serious as protecting Nazis, I hope we can move to a vote as soon as possible.
Madam Chair?
Yes?
Yes.
Your hand was up?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. I, too, am perplexed as to why, with this special meeting that was called to address CBC and the minister, why this has come up at this point. Many of us are not regular members of this committee, and I am not comfortable with proceeding further on this. So I move now to adjourn.
There's a motion to adjourn, and we only have, we've just got 5 more minutes left on the clock. So, yes, shall I call a vote on adjourning?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Go ahead.
I find it shameful we're adjourning on such an important debate about releasing the names of
Ms.
Nazis that were
Ashton,
allowed
sorry,
in
I'm
Canada.
calling for a vote. Thank you. Clerk?
And the vote is, shall the debate be adjourned? Madam Durozowski.
Julie Zarowitz. I agree. Adjourn debate.
Mr. Long.
Point of order.
Who is calling for a point of order? I can't see.
That's Brenda.
Brenda, yes?
Yes.
We're in the middle of a
is
vote,
it-
Ms.
is-
Shanahan, but go ahead.
The point of order is to adjourn the meeting, or is it to adjourn debate?
We are voting on the motion to adjourn. We can't debate it, but we can vote on it. So go ahead, please, Clerk.
She's looking for clarification.
Yeah, sorry, Madam Shanahan. Are you asking to adjourn the debate on the motion? I'm not clear what you're adjourning.
Yes, to adjourn debate.
All right, so go ahead, Clerk.
And the motion to adjourn debate on the motion. Mr. Long.
Yes.
Madame Lalonde.
Oui.
Madam Shanahan.
Oui.
Mr. Souza.
Yes.
Mr. Waugh.
No.
Mr. Couric.
No.
Mr. Gould.
No.
Mr. Duncan.
No.
Mr. Champoux.
Oui.
Madam Ashton.
No.
That's yay pour 6, nays contre 5.
So the debate is adjourned, and we started 10 minutes late. We're now 10 minutes after 12. I think the minister was very clear that she had an hour to give us because of certain circumstances with regard to maternity leave, and I think we should decide to adjourn the meeting now. I want to thank the minister.
Could we not keep our rounds, at least the last two, to have Conservatives and Liberals to have
Not necessarily, because we only have resources for till noon, and we're now 10 minutes after noon. So
it's a trunk. I'll take 2.5 minutes or something along the lines of that.
Well,
it's a recess week.
I'm sorry, we've got 5 minutes for you and 5 minutes for Ms. Lalonde if you go on. And so basically, we will get us to 20 minutes after 12. We need resources to continue. We need interpretation and other resources to continue.
It's a constituency week. There's no other committees going on. There's resources issue.
That
We're all
has
here.
nothing to do with it, Mr. Duncan.
Well, just asking for 2.5 minutes at least each.
You are not asking for 2.5 minutes. We're asking for resources. I'm sorry. We're 10 minutes over time, and the minister is 10 minutes over time. And so I think I will.
Liberal MPs that were late for the meeting. We had to start late.
I will adjourn the meeting. Yes, sorry, somebody's hand is up. Sorry, Mr. Souza.
Yeah, I just point of order. I just want to move to adjourn debate. Adjourn the meeting.
Yes.
I just move to adjourn the meeting.
Anyone opposed to adjourning the meeting? Obviously,
yes,
you are, Mr. Duncan, but
I have some questions.
Okay. Anyone else? So the meeting is now adjourned.